Imagine you have gone on a journey to a land where once a week the inhabitants stand around for a period of time, sometimes several hours, and for no particular reason, they stop standing around and resume their daily affairs. And you ask them, well, what's all this standing around about? And they say, well, on Fridays, everybody waits. And you say, well, what are you waiting for? And they look blankly at you. Of course, it would be very difficult to make sense of that behavior. Waiting has particular kinds of behaviors that we make sense of as waiting. Just standing around doing nothing is not in itself waiting. And when we wait, there is a reason. There is a reason why we wait. We're not just waiting, as it were, because we need a rest. Could be a reason, but generally reasons for waiting are different. Sometimes we find waiting frustrating, sometimes it's rewarding. When Jesus, in this parable, talks about the doorkeeper who waits for the master, we don't know a huge amount about what goes on in this doorkeeper's head. We don't know the motivation of the doorkeeper. We're not told anything about the background. More importantly, we're not immediately told anything about the relationship between the servant and the master. So in order to fill in that gap, we have to again look at waiting. Why do we wait? What are the reasons? Now, sometimes when we wait, our waiting has nothing to do with what we're waiting for. The motivation is external. The reason could be external to the waiting. Let's say this servant had been promised a reward when the master returns, or threatened with a punishment. Their concern is waiting for the reward or the punishment. That's why they wait. If they could get the reward and the punishment without the waiting, they would either avoid the punishment or get the reward. Alternatively, the servant could be motivated because of the thing or the person for which they're waiting. See, children wait in anticipation of Christmas. Parents wait for the birth of a child. Not because of any external reward, but in anticipation of the thing itself. In this case, the waiting is not just something to get through, something you would dispose of necessarily, but it's a time where you can prepare yourself. It's an opportunity for preparation for the thing you wait for. So when Christmas comes, the child enters into a greater joy than they would without the waiting, because they prepared themselves for the joys of Christmas. And those parents waiting for their child, their joy is greater because of the preparation, the anticipation of the birth of the child. So if this servant sees the waiting as merely something to get through, something which they have to endure, then they will gain little from the experience. Of course, endurance is a very important part of waiting. But if waiting just becomes endurance, then it becomes empty, fruitless. Endurance has to be for a reason. So what reason may the servant have for waiting beyond a reward or a punishment, important as those are? Well, if the master is wise, and the servant knows the master is wise, the servant will think, there is a good reason. There is a reason why I'm waiting at this gate. There's a reason why I'm waiting for the master. My master is wise. They wouldn't have me waiting here for no reason, in vain. And so a lot turns upon how they view the master, on their relationship with the master, as to how they view this waiting. If the master remains a distant figure, issuing orders from afar, then the waiting and any requirements during the waiting will be seen as externally imposed, very hard to make sense of. Of course, you could still trust in that master if you have good reason to believe the master is wise and good. But your relationship will remain somewhat external. If the master, however, has communicated, has a relationship beyond the merely external one with the servant, if the master has welcomed the servant into their plans, then the servant will begin to see the waiting in a different light. The waiting will not be just something you have to get through, something perhaps imposed by somebody good and wise, but you don't really understand why you should wait. In this case, you are included in the plans of the master. And in this case, the waiting becomes much more fruitful. Not only have you got a good reason, but actually those reasons become internalized, become part of your own identity. Your identity as a doorkeeper, as a person who waits, is not just something you put on and leave. When you leave the door, it becomes part of who you are, internalized. In this time of Advent, we wait for the coming of Christ, for the birth of that child. And our waiting is not vain because we have a wise and good master, a wise God who rules the world in his providence. But more than that, God has included us in his plans for our own salvation and for the salvation and redemption of the whole world. This child is one of us, fully human. That most deep, intimate, interior level, God has joined us to himself, including us in his providence, in his wise governance, through his Son, Jesus Christ. And so this is not just a time of waiting to endure, something given for external reason, but it's an inner transformation of ourselves, as we are caught up in the love of God. Sometimes people will be told by a boss, well, of course you're very important to the company. We really value you. And if that person is included in a sense of where the company's going, has more than just a passive say, of course they will feel their worth to the company is much greater. But people may say, well, I've heard management speak time and time again. I've heard people talking about how it's important for me to be included, but I've got no evidence of this. I think this is just people spinning something to get me to work harder. But if your boss is willing to stake something for you, then that becomes a proof that the boss is not just manipulating you. And what could God give that is greater than himself in the person of Jesus Christ, his only Son? There is nothing greater God could give to us. God has given his own self, And so we are caught up in the life of God and the providence of God in this most intimate way. And the God who has not held back from giving himself to us so that we can give ourselves in return. So let our waiting not be in vain. God has sent his Son into this world. He could give no greater gift. So let us be confident in his promises. Let our hearts be stirred by the promise of his love. Let our lives be transformed by the help he sends each day through the gift and the virtue of hope. And let us wait patiently and fruitfully for his return.